I just thought, look, let's do something different tonight. Let's talk with a man we haven't had on for a couple of months now, Christiaan Van Heijst. He's a 747 cargo pilot, aviation photographer and author, who is collating at the moment sightings from commercial pilots and others of things that we can't explain. Let's go to Holland, talk with him now. Christiaan, thank you very much for coming on. Nice to speak with you again.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a real honor. Thank you.
Christiaan, nice to see you again. Of course, we had those July 26th hearings, or the hearing in Washington, which made history. It was claimed that history was made at that session. Time will tell whether indeed it was. Now they're looking for the evidence, and they were asking before and after that hearing for people, not just in the military, but also people who work in commercial aviation like yourself, to come forward and tell in complete freedom what they've seen. So I am guessing, but I don't know, and the reason for getting you on tonight, mainly, is to find out, since that's happened, what sorts of things are you hearing?
Interestingly enough, when I came forward, I was one of the first commercial pilots to come forward with my story, because I basically found the topic too important, especially the flight safety aspect, too important to let it go unnoticed. Interestingly enough, I've been approached by many pilots anonymously via email, but also people who simply wanted to share their story with me. Really compelling stories sometimes just rather mundane sightings, sometimes really, really dramatic sightings. But the most interesting is to see how my own colleagues were reacting to it, and still do. And it's really nice to see that nobody is laughing at me or mocking me, at least not straight in my face, none of my colleagues. But a lot of pilots, they started coming forward with their own experiences. And some of my colleagues are veteran pilots, ex-Air Force pilots who've been flying sometimes for 40 years. And suddenly they feel free to talk about their own experiences with me in the flight, because it's a trusted environment, and they know I'm not going to laugh at them. And those stories are remarkable. It's heartbreaking sometimes that people are finally able and willing to share their stories for the first time in a trusted environment, at least with me. So I think what Ryan Graves is doing is fundamental to get rid of the stigma, to get rid of the fear of being ridiculed. And I think it's fantastic that he's interviewing pilots. I was in his podcast, Merged, last year, and now more and more pilots are either anonymously or privately opening up to him. And I think this is a wonderful development, because if there's something so fundamentally important going on in the skies, it should be talked about. Even if it's maybe a new weather phenomena or whatever, we have to talk about it, and we have to get the data.
Yep. Later on this show, in this second hour, we're going to be talking with Kevin Randall about the events in 1952 over Washington, D.C. and around the U.S. And I was shocked when reading his book about this. He's updated the book that he wrote about this, to read that actually we haven't made a whole lot of progress in collating these reports and investigating them and publishing the details. I would have thought that in the 70-odd years since then, we would have done, but we haven't. So I guess what I'm asking you is, you're telling me that these people are now feeling empowered to come forward. Could you share with me any stories, a story that they might have told you recently that is going to fascinate my audience?
Well, most of the experiences that my own colleagues have shared with me have happened in the past. I think it's important to notice that when pilots see UAP, it's really rare, even though a lot of pilots are seeing it. Sometimes they only see it once in their career or twice in their career, so it's really rare. But one of the most fascinating accounts that I was told by one of my colleagues, also a 747 pilot, really experienced. He was flying from Europe to South Africa, and it was going through the night. And basically, at one point, there was a moonless night. They were just flying over the middle of Africa, no light pollution, just the stars. And they were being overtaken. Their 747 in flight was being overtaken by a swarm of, he estimates, between 15 and 25 red lights. He couldn't even tell me if it was a physical object or an orb, but the airplane was just overtaken almost twice or three times the speed by a huge fleet of these orbs. And they seemed to be completely oblivious to this airplane. And they just overtook him, and they disappeared into the distance, and they were gone. And both of the pilots, they were just flabbergasted. And the worst is that they had no clue what it was. I mean, the first reaction we have as pilots is, what the heck is that? Because you want to identify something that's close to your airplane, or even could potentially be a hazard. And we're really trained to identify weather phenomena or other airplanes. And if you see something like this that is completely off the chart, it just leaves a huge silence and a question mark among pilots. So this was really one of the most fascinating accounts I've heard. But also what I've heard a couple of times is metallic objects, either orbs or metallic objects.
Well, you sent us an image that we can see on that side of the screen just beyond you. Is that one such there?
I don't know. This is not my image, I must say. I saw this one on Ryan Graves' feed. I have no clue what this is. This is a bit too vague for me. It could be maybe a satellite that's flaring up, but I don't know the background about about this particular image. But some pilots, they see bright lights. Some pilots, they see physical objects. Other pilots, they see craft that are hovering close to their airplane. It's rather rare. It's mostly bright lights that are moving very erratically, either close to their airplane or in the sky. But the stories vary completely, and it's fascinating to hear those accounts firsthand.
When you sit on the flight deck of the cargo 747s that you captain, you're not always, I presume, with the same people. You're with air crew who are mix and matched. You know, you have people maybe you haven't worked with for a couple of months, whatever. When you have conversations in the dead of night, maybe you're flying down to Africa, wherever you're going, and there are long periods when you fly, when you're on autopilot, and there's not a whole lot to do, unless there's some kind of emergency that develops, and we hope there isn't. Do they tell you things?
Sometimes, yeah. And it's really interesting because the topic is hardly being discussed among pilots. But especially since a lot of my own colleagues know that I came forward with my stories, they feel comfortable to share their experiences with me. And it was just last year, or maybe a couple of months ago, I was flying with the same co-pilot for almost a whole week. And only on the last flight, he really dared to open up to me. And it was really fascinating to hear his own experiences. And that shows that the stigma is still there. A lot of pilots are really afraid of coming forward. But I must say, you know, it's really a shame that passengers are not allowed in the cockpit of an airliner anymore, because especially at night when we dim all the lights and there's no moon, and you see the Milky Way, you see thousands and millions of stars. Topics quite often just wander into let's say, the question of life and the universe, and but still UAP or UFOs are hardly discussed, even though many pilots are quite interested in it, and they either have experienced something or they're open to it. And of course, it's still a certain percentage of pilots who just refuse to talk about it because they think it's hocus pocus. But that's just like a cross section of society, I guess.
I agree. It's a shame that we can't go into the flight deck now. I was lucky enough to go a couple of times onto 747 flight decks. I remember landing in Hong Kong with Cathay Pacific some years ago. And I remember in particular doing exactly what you talked about, flying down to Africa, going all the way down to Johannesburg. And I used to be, you know, occasionally I'd kind of invite myself onto the flight deck in the days when you could do that. And they were always cool. They would say, yeah, take a seat, sit in the jump seat. And I'd always be looking up, up, up. And in the middle of the night, around the intertropical convergence zone, which is right in the middle of Africa, where there is absolutely nothing, I used to look way, way up and hope that I would see something. I never did, apart from the beautiful display of stars. And the only thing that you do see are other planes, just like cars passing you, that shoot towards you. And I can remember, sadly it wasn't a UFO, but I remember that the other planes flash their headlights at you as they're coming towards you. It's just fab to do. So listen, keep collating the reports. If you hear anything, let me know. And what's your website so people can check out the stuff you have got?
I really appreciate that, Howard. Really appreciate it. I have a website and also my Instagram account, which is JPC Van Heijst. I know it's very difficult to pronounce for non-Dutchies. So even if you Google it, if you Google my name, Christiaan Van Heijst, even phonetically, you will probably find my website coming on top.
You see, I was trying to do the authentic, and I was getting it wrong by saying Heist. It's Heist. Okay.
It's heist, you know, like a bank robbery, but
exactly. And I wasn't going to call you Heist in case you said no, Heist is a bank robbery.